Hi again, Mark here from Talkingbass.net. Today I'm going to give you a quick lesson on a scale that's used in loads and loads of bass lines, melodies, solos, and as a basis for whole compositions. So it's worth knowing even if you're a little sketchy on the whole mode thing. I am of course talking about the Mixolydian mode. Now, the first thing that springs to mind when musicians hear about things like the Mixolydian scale or the Phrygian scale or the Locrian scale is, oh heck, that sounds really advanced, or oh no, that's all that mode stuff that I've heard about and I don't understand it. So let me just say right off the bat, modes are just scales like any other scale, like the major scale or the minor scale. It's just a way of dividing an octave up in a certain way. So there's nothing weird about them. There's no advanced music theory that you need to know. Just think of scales as musical recipes. Every scale has a certain flavor depending on the intervals within. So, you know, if you take a major scale, for instance, it sounds fairly happy. If you take a minor scale, it sounds a little bit sad. Maybe a double harmonic scale sounds a little bit exotic. Each scale has its own flavor that is the sum total of all the intervals within. In terms of the naming of the modes, the traditional modes that we talk about, like the Mixolydian scale, well, there's just a long backstory, so the names are all Greek. Musicians don't tend to be scared off by the blues scale because they think, oh, that's bluesy, I use that in blues. But really there's no difference in what we're actually looking at. It's just a different way of dividing an octave. How you apply a scale obviously needs some consideration, but in terms of the nuts and bolts of them, it's all really simple, so that's a really good place to start. So let's start by just looking at what a Mixolydian mode is. Forget about how modes can be derived from a parent major scale, all that stuff. Just look at the Mixolydian scale as a separate scale in its own right, just as if we were looking at a major scale. So I will assume that most of you know what a major scale is. Now, if you don't, I'm going to run through it anyway, so let's have a look at a C major scale. So if we just take the C there, third fret of the A string, we just work up with the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, and that's a C major scale. So in terms of the frets, third fret, fifth fret, A string, second fret, third fret, fifth fret, D string, second fret, fourth fret, fifth fret on the G string, and you can just move that around. As long as you start on a C, that's a C major scale, okay? So a Mixolydian scale is exactly the same as a major scale, but we flatten the 7th degree. So let's number those notes. If we start on the C again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1 again for the octave. So if we find that 7th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Instead of the B there, we flatten it, so we take it down a half step, just 1 fret, to the B flat, which is the 3rd fret. So that gives us the following scale: C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. Okay, so 3rd fret, 5th fret, A string, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 5th fret, D string, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 5th fret on the G string. And that's a Mixolydian scale. You want to play it up and down and then move it around to start on different Cs. So there I'm starting on the C, 3rd fret of the A string. I could play it there, 8th fret of the E string. I could even move it up here, 15th fret of the A string. You know, just move it around a little just to get used to that pattern. So that's the nuts and bolts of the Mixolydian scale. So just as with the major scale, minor scale, pentatonic scale, whatever scale, you want to practice it in many different ways. So you could practice it in many different keys. So you could try working through, let's say, the circle of fourths. So I might play C Mixolydian, F Mixolydian, B flat, E flat, etc. Just working through the cycle of fourths. If you don't know the cycle of fourths, I do have lessons devoted to that. You could also try playing from different fingers. So I was playing it from the 2nd finger there, but you could also try playing it from the 1st finger, which gives a different pattern. Or maybe the 4th finger. Okay, a different pattern again, and then you move that around. You could also try maybe playing it in multiple octaves, like 2 octaves. So here's a G Mixolydian, working up into 2 octaves. Again, I've got lots of lessons devoted to this. You could even try restricting yourself, so maybe try playing it on 2 strings. So there's a G Mixolydian again, and I'm just playing it on 2 strings as opposed to 3 strings. Many different ways that you can try playing scales around on the neck. But one of the most important things is that you just want to get used to the sound and feel of it. You really want to be able to hear that flat 7 in there, that minor 7th interval. It has a lot of character. A lot more ballsy than the C major, sorry, the major scale. So if I was to play the C major, there's that major 7th, very bittersweet with the flat 7. So we get a lot more balls in there. So we've got, you know, that whole step between the root note and the 7th as opposed to the half step. So yeah, you just want to get used to the sound of it, play around with it, just get used to a lot of the intervals in there. Now, obviously, you could delve much deeper into this mode and its use, but I don't want to fry your brain too much with the application at this point. But one thing that's really worth mentioning is the tonic chord. So that's the chord built on the 1st degree of the scale, and this is going to determine what chords we can play over with this scale from a chord scale perspective. So, spoiler alert, the root or tonic chord of the Mixolydian scale is the major chord if we're looking at a 3-note chord, a triad, or the dominant 7 chord if we're looking at a 4-note chord or a 7th chord. So to explain how this works and why those chords are in there, we're going to look at the notes of this Mixolydian scale, but we're going to build up from the root note in thirds. Now the reason we're looking at thirds is because that's how all the common chords that you see in songs are actually made. They're actually made from stacked thirds. So don't worry too much about the theory of that right now. All you have to do is think we're going up in thirds. Now a really easy way to do that within a scale is to just work up through the scale, but we're going to play a note, then miss a note, then play a note, and then miss a note. So if you do that, you end up with thirds because you're thinking note, miss a note, note. That's a third. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So let's start with the C Mixolydian scale on the C. So we're starting on the root note. We play a note, then we work up D, but we miss that note. So C, miss a note. Next note is E, play a note. Next note is F, we miss that. Then we're at a G, we play that note, and then we're up again. A, miss that out. Then we're to the B flat, okay? Simple as that. So play a note, miss a note, play a note, miss a note, play a note, miss a note, play a note. And that gives us the notes in there, C, E, G, and B flat, okay? So that's as far as we're going to go. We could actually continue to the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th, which is how you would create those chords. So if we were going to take a 3-note chord, we'd just look at the first 3 of those notes. So that would give us C, E, and G. So that's a triad, and it just so happens if you know your arpeggios, that's a C major triad. So we would have a C major chord. Okay? Continue another third on, we get the B flat. If you know your arpeggios, you would know that that's a C dominant 7 chord, or a C7, which sounds like this. Okay? So that's the chords we have built from the root note of a Mixolydian scale. There's a 3-note chord, we've got a triad, a major triad. As a 4-note chord or a 7th chord, we've got a dominant 7 chord. So, because we now know that we have a dominant 7 chord on the root note of that Mixolydian scale, it means we can play that Mixolydian scale over dominant 7 chords. Or if we were writing a piece, we got a riff and it was using a Mixolydian scale, if you wanted to know the chord that you were going to play, you know, with that riff, it's going to be a dominant 7 chord. Okay? So, we now have ourselves a scale. And we have ourselves a chord. So now let's try putting it all together in the shape of a simple riff. So the riff is going to sound like this with a drum track. So this riff uses the notes of the Mixolydian scale, and I've been sure to use notes that really have that character of the Mixolydian scale in there. So there are certain notes in the scale that we call characteristic scale steps, where they really contain a lot of the emotive value in there and a lot of the feel of the scale. And it just so happens that a lot of the time it's going to be the 3rd and the 7th. In the Mixolydian scale, we're going to be looking to use the 3rd and the 7th in there. So let's have a look at the notes in there. So this is in C, so it's C Mixolydian, so we're over a C7 chord, and we're starting with a C there at the 8th fret of the E string. Okay, so just remind yourself of the Mixolydian, the C Mixolydian there. Okay, and remember this is all transcribed in the lesson material over at talkingbass.net, so just follow the link in the info below to download all the tab for this. So, and the drum track is there too. So, we have the C there, 8th fret of the E string, and then we have... So we're moving up to the flat 7 there, so this is going to be the 8th fret of the D string, and then up to the 10th fret of the D string. So it's B flat to C. Okay, so flat 7 up to octave. Okay, then we have this. So first of all, I'll put in a little ghost note, okay, just on the D string, so just holding the notes lightly there. And then we have B flat twice down to the E. So this is the flat and 7th interval and then the 3rd. So we've got twice on the 8th fret of the D string and then once on the 7th fret of the A string. So then we're back to the C and pretty much the same riff. So we've got the 8th fret E string, then 8th fret D string up to 10th fret D string. And then we drop down to the 6th fret of the E string, to the B flat. So this is that 7th interval, but an octave lower. And then we play the 3rd again. So this is going to be the 7th fret of the A string. Okay, so when I'm saying the 3rd and the 7th, I'm not meaning frets, I'm actually meaning the intervals within the scale. Okay, so all together we have... Okay, and that's the whole riff, just round and round. And I put in another ghost note in there just before I hit that low B flat. So that's the riff, okay? So you just want to try that slowly to begin with. Just, you know, take your time with it. Just get it under your fingers and keep looking at the notes of that Mixolydian in there. Be aware of which intervals we're playing, you know, because that makes it a lot easier when you want to move keys, okay? So slowly, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now just one tiny little technical tip. When you actually come to the repeats of that riff, because you're going to be, let's say when we're up here and you might want to play that root note again with the 2nd finger, rather than playing the 1st finger and then having to bar for the flat 7 up there. That happened to me once when I was playing it there, as you might have noticed, and you can kind of scuff it sometimes. So, you know, when you come back round, just land on that 2nd finger. But that's the riff. So let's just try that again with the backing track. Now, as I mentioned, pay specific attention to the intervals within there, or the scale degrees that we're using. So, as you may have noticed, I didn't really use the 5th in there, the 2nd, anything like that, or the 4th. It was mainly the root note, that flat and 7th, and that 3rd, because that's where a lot of the character of that scale come from. And we're outlining the notes of the chord as well, that, you know, the C dominant 7 there. So when we play that, you know, again, like I said, it's a lot more ballsy. You know, anybody that knows the classic riff, "You Really Got Me," you know, that's right there. You know, you will see that used so many times in a lot of riffs. You know, you got the root note and you've got that note a whole step below, or 2 frets below. So that's what we've got in the Mixolydian. We've got that nice strong 7th in there, as opposed to, you know, that bittersweet major 7th from the major scale. And then when we come down to the 3rd, because of the interval that we have between the 3rd, the major 3rd, and the dominant 7 there, we've got this tritone, which is that real evil interval. You know, on its own, it just sounds pretty evil, kind of thing you'd get in death metal. But when we actually put it in this context, it gives us that kind of, well, gives us that weird little sound that really you would attribute to blues. So when you actually have that chord there, the C7, I'm actually playing the E and the B flat there, which is that weird little tritone interval, that evil sound, but then we put the C underneath it, and here presto, we've got blues. Okay, so that little tritone in there is responsible for a lot of the flavour of the Mixolydian, so it's worth really milking that if you want to get that sound. Now, as an extra bit of practice, if you have a looper, then you could try soloing or coming up with some melodies over that riff using that Mixolydian scale. So, here I have a ditto looper by TC Electronic, and I've just recorded the bass line and a little bit of chords over the top just to give it more of that dominant 7 flavour, and here it is played on the looper. So, there's the riff, and now I can just practice coming up with some melodies. Okay. Now, this lesson is obviously just intended as a basic primer and doesn't give any insight into how we can derive modes from a parent major scale. We don't look at the various chords within the mode or how we can compose a modal piece. We don't look at the mode as a chord scale for playing other chord progressions. These are all different areas of study, and I've actually got several lessons on YouTube devoted to those. So I'll link to those lessons in the info below, so just check out that and you'll get a little bit more insight into modes in general. Okay, so like this video if it's helped, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to hit that little bell symbol to receive notifications every week for the new lessons on a Friday. Also, be sure to visit Talkingbass for hundreds more lessons on every topic imaginable. Just hit that link in the info below and then sign up for the free membership to gain access to the members area where you'll get lots of free practice resources, downloads, and loads more. Okay, so I'll see you next week.